So I mean, before we get into the nitty gritty of like the assignments and stuff, I kind of just want to address these general questions that anybody should have when they're entering an African American art history class or just talking about black art. So, what is black art? What would you say black art is in your own personal opinions? The best way you can formulate it.
Anything made by like a person of color mostly. Yeah, like that. It's like the base like
Okay.
standard.
Okay.
um, Visually articulating the culture and perspective of Black people, Black
Okay.
culture.
Okay. So we're pretty comfortable in the common sense of a person who of color who makes artwork about the tradition and culture of blackness in America, or are we talking about that's also the because this is
I feel like it's pretty general. I feel like you can use that like perspective outside of like Black Americans.
okay. So it's a global thing, and I think that goes in that makes the questions 4 words. What is black art? It makes the question a lot more complicated because then you say, what is black?
Yeah.
Who is black? Who is entitled? What is blackness? Is blackness a global identity trait, or is it just something that is really born in America? Some may say that blackness is yes global. It does have global concerns because there's black people everywhere, and but when has blackness been as prevalent of a concept in other countries as it has been here? And if so, if not, I mean, if it's really more of an Americanized term and it's a term that really applies to, you can go get it again. I would just lock the door. Good. So yeah, if we're looking at it as this sort of Americanized concept, or at least American centralized concept, then we do have to get a little bit more specific about what black art is. Is it a carrying on of a tradition and culture that is born and bred in America? And if so, who has who's allowed to make it? And it kind of makes it there's plenty of like historical moments that muddy this question. So before I go into that, would who do you think is allowed to make black art?
I feel like it's kind of like, but I feel like you could probably say that there's like a difference between Black art and then like categorize that as like African American art.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
so I don't know. It's weird.
I
It's
think
hard.
I think you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that. I mean, I definitely think that Black art. I mean, I guess since I'm in America, it feels like African Americans created Black art,
Mhm.
but I do only feel like Black people should make are allowed to make Black art.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so and that is very it's an important distinction. Like just what we're talking about with what is black art. African American versus black, but then also versus African. Because we're descendants of Africa, are we allowed to make African art? If I make a work about specifically about Africa, it has nothing to do with American culture, tradition, any of that. If I make an artwork, even though I'm American, if I make an artwork about Africa, am I making African art? I think and then you have to think vice versa. If you're an African and you're making artwork about being black in America, are you making black art? Are you making African American art? Do these things have to exist separately, or is there a connection between all three of those, genres of art making?
I feel like there's a connection. I feel like, um, as me being an African American, that if I were to make African art, it would be pulling from my heritage. It may not be like on the surface, but it's just like pulling it from somewhere. So I feel like I would be able to make African art, even though I'm not from. I don't know. It's kind of like it to me. It goes from doing nationality to like culture. It's kind of like intersecting them a lot. So it's kind of like weird, but like yes, I feel like I could make African art, but
I feel like like if you're a person of color, like you automatically have like some type of like praise or
Yeah.
like slack given to you. So like I feel like that should be like the standard. Like and then like you also have like you know connections to Africa in some like form
Yeah.
or like way. So
And but then also you say person of color, but person of all skin folk ain't kinfolk. There's Dominicans who will be very explicit about how not black they are. And there are Brazilians and South Americans who will be very explicit about how not black they are. There are Africans who will be very explicit about how not black they are. They're African. So I think that all goes to complicate what we know as black art, what we know as African American art and African art. And I think that there is a co-relationship between all of those things. I think that it's a sticky game, sticky web to put yourself in. Because then once you start saying who can make what, you're already limiting what black art can be. If I say, you can't make black art because you're from Africa, or you can't make African American art because you're from Africa, or you're from Brazil, you're from the Dominican Republic. Am I limiting what African American art can be, or am I limiting what black art can be, or am I setting very clear parameters? It's a seesaw.
Yeah.
It's a seesaw. One way is not, no way is the right way. No way is the better way. But then you also got to think about content and characteristics. So what are the characteristics of black art? And then I'll weave that back to the last of who's allowed to make it after you guys answer. So what are the characteristics of black art, African American art specifically? We're not going to talk about African art right now. Specifically black art in an American context.
I feel like it's like telling stories about our lineage, past, and things like that.
Okay, storytelling.
Yeah.
Storytelling, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with him. The same. It's kind of the same thing. I was gonna say it kind of more blunt. It's just like kind of like our struggle, like what we go through, but it's also
experience.
Our experiences.
Experience. Okay.
Just like how we take in the world around us, I guess. It's like a lot of the similarities.
Okay, so in terms of experience and storytelling, if we look at historically, there are a couple incidences when African American art or black art is featured in a museum, right? And the artwork does not fully reflect, is about storytelling and is about the experience, but does not fully reflect the things we're saying about who's allowed to make it. There's a great book called Whitewalling, and it's about basically three incidents in which museum culture has directly gone against everything we've been talking about, right? So one was in 2016. That was Dana Schultz. She painted Emmett Till's open casket. This is a white woman, right? And she painted Emmett Till's, the name of the piece is Open Casket. You can look it up. So obviously, immediately, you get a lot of backlash because you're a white woman painting Emmett Till's open casket. Not painting Emmett Till as he was, before all of the brutalization and violence, but painting him in the casket. And it's not a hyper-realistic painting, so it doesn't look like, you don't immediately know what it is when you look at it. But once you find out what it is, it's like, oh, that's not okay. Or it's not okay in quotation marks, because then we have to go circle back to who's allowed to make black art. She's storytelling and she's talking about the experience, but she did not live that experience. Do you want to know what her justification was?
Yes.
She felt that as a mother, she wanted to understand what Emmett Till's mother felt, or wanted to highlight the feeling that she felt seeing her child that way. And she wanted to, that painting was her empathizing with the experience, with the story. So does that make it okay?
Girl, no.
Okay.
No.
It doesn't make it necessarily okay, but I do kind of understand or empathize with her a little bit more. But I don't think it should have been given as much publicity as it should have been. I feel like that should have been a more private or reserved piece.
Yes.
And not like something that should have been given.
Yeah, and it was in a major show. It was in a major group exhibition that piece was featured in. And it also begs the question of how genuine is that? Okay, girl, you could have painted Emmett Till regularly and been like,
I just feel like there wasn't empathy. That was her saying that. I think to me it felt very selfish. That's a very selfish painting. Like, because first off, like if you know his story, it's just like for you to even think that it was okay for you to do it, it's kind of like, no, you shouldn't have done it. Just as you being a white woman, the reason why he was in the casket was because of a white woman. I just don't think that's okay.
Yeah.
And then I know that, you know, women want to be like, I empathize, you know, but like that was probably really painful for her to see. And just like you said, him, like her publicizing it and making it, and then not even adding much technique behind it to even make it clear. I just think there was kind of like, I can see where in her mind she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry," but like it doesn't come across that way.
No, it doesn't. It comes off very selfish, very egotistical, like a lot of hubris to think that you can make a painting that connects to that experience and that story in a way that more than a Black person could, more than, you know, and we get it, you're a mother, like, but you don't have to. There was plenty of ways to go about that.
So many other ways.
So many other ways. And then it boils down to choices and, again, characteristics. That wasn't a characteristic of her painting. Genuine connection and genuine understanding and empathy was not a characteristic of her painting. Storytelling was not a characteristic. Experience was not a characteristic of that work. Can I help you? Oh, you just said, okay. Storytelling and experience was not a characteristic of that work. So then you go, are you allowed to do that?
No.
The answer is obviously no, or is because obviously she's a white woman painting something so atrociously violent that happened because of a white woman. It just continues to muddy the water. But then that's not the only. There's two other instances in the book that make that whole characteristics question loaded, because then you've got I think it was in the 1970s, 1960s, one of those. It was they did a exhibition. They were trying to do an exhibition called the Harlem on My Mind exhibition. And some of y'all might have heard of this, but it basically is a white curator put together this exhibition about Harlem that didn't really reflect the voices, include the input of the people from Harlem. So is that a Black art exhibition? Is that an African American art exhibition? Even though it features African American art, has it in there. It's the whole thing is about Harlem, a Black neighborhood. And obviously Harlem is also the bedrock of where African American art comes from, at least from what we talk about. We'll debate that a little bit more when we get into, the actual lectures, but as far as common knowledge, that's the bedrock. So does that make it African American art?
Well, I feel like it depends. Are they from Harlem? Or
the artist in the show? Yeah, the work featured in the show, in the Harlem on My Mind exhibition, was from, Harlem.
Okay.
But it's a white curator who's curating the, and if you think about it from the curator standpoint, the curator is organizing the experience that you want to have when you go into the museum. So if I'm a white curator and I'm saying I'm about to make a exhibition about Pine Bluff, and everybody in Pine Bluff is like, yeah, I got advice, I got suggestions. People you could listen to, because they're from Pine Bluff. And then I say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make the exhibition I want to make.
Yeah, that's not Black art.
That's not Black art. So then the other incident was way wilder. White artist does a series of charcoal drawings. Nothing to do with black people. Nothing to do with the experience or storytelling. But you know what the title of that exhibition was? Entitled The Nigger Drawings. So then you got to get into what characteristics of his work, besides using charcoal, which is black, possessed him to name it that, right? We gotta.
It was literally like no.
Yeah, I was
correlation
looking at it like,
between-
No,
He
no.
just wanted to say that. Like,
He
Yeah.
just wanted to say that.
And that's what I'm saying. Like sometimes it's like I see that I see a lot of like white artists. They'll say stuff like that, which is like I feel like it's attention seeking. I
So
feel like that's an attention seeking. Like you said something that was going to get people's attention.
yeah.
So
So in terms of the characteristics that make Black art what it is, or African American art what it is, we've already noted that it's a little bit of storytelling, it's a little bit of experience. But what happens when that experience and that story is co-opted, by someone who's not lived it, who's not a descendant of those stories? And then what happens when it's boiled down to aesthetics? Because obviously aesthetically his drawings were Black, so he was like, yeah, niggers, just to put it plainly. That's his mind, his mind train of thought went there. So then what happens to our work? What is happening in African American art from what what you've seen aesthetically, that build its characteristics, if you've known any? Obviously storytelling and experience are a little bit more concepts than they are aesthetic attributes. So what are some aesthetic attributes that obviously not just Black, the color Black, like, whatever that guy's name was, but what aesthetic attributes would you attribute to African American art?
a lot of like patterns.
Okay, pattern,
stuff
yeah.
like that. Symbolization.
Symbolism, yeah.
With the masks and stuff.
I would say like probably like the composition of how I guess the art is made, like the story within it, I guess, is like similar amongst like a lot of different African American artists that I know, because all of them are like trying to talk about, I guess, an underlying issue,
Okay.
that is within our culture,
And it's a layered experience. So
Yeah.
you can say composition. There's
Okay.
the way that it's laid out that
Yeah.
that attributes to the storytelling. You've got pattern, and you've got, what is the other thing you said? You said pattern and symbolism. Pattern and symbolism that obviously goes into a little bit of experience, because traditional African cultures have a lot of pattern, a lot of symbolism, all this stuff like that. I would also add in color. I will add in color. In another word that I would say in terms of aesthetics or the way that it looks, it would be diversity. Black art is diverse. If you can name me two artists, and if we go through this experience of this entire semester, we can point to two artists who are doing the same thing the same way, whose work looks the same. We can negate that diversity word out of there. But the main thing that I've noticed about African American art is that it is extremely diverse. You can't point to two artists whose work looks the same. You can point to artists who are inspired by other artists, but you can't really point to a lot of Black artists, African American artists, real artists, I mean, whose work overlaps in that way. Now, contemporary, a little different. And we'll get to that. When we get to the 90s and we get to the rise of technology, things get a little bit more commercial. Things get a little bit more repetitive, imitative, all that stuff like that. We see it every day. Everybody and their grandma want to paint Snoop Dogg. But, so yeah, we do get to the point where some Black artists are doing the same thing. But if we're talking about true artists, true fine artists, which is the majority of what we'll talk about in this class, there's definitely a distinction between each individual artist that will come across the screen, right? So, to recap, what is Black art? Obviously, it is a carrying forth of a tradition, of a story, of a history, of an experience through visual aesthetics. And not always visual, sometimes audible, sometimes, we get it in music, we get it in hip hop. That is Black art as well. It's not exclusive to the African American experience, but Blackness is deeply embedded in the African American experience, and that is translated through the art. Who's allowed to make it? Obviously, Black people who are able to authentically speak to the story and from the experience, tell the story and speak from the experience authentically. There's anybody can paint a Black person going through struggle, but being able to authentically relay that in your work is a whole other thing. White, Black, or other. It's like, because that white woman could have painted, could have imagined what it was like to be that white woman who got Emmett Till killed. She could have painted that. That could have been her, and she could have made it extremely, and she could have still named it Open Casket. Like, and that would have been an authentic creation. Maybe not Black. It wouldn't be Black art because obviously she's not speaking from the experience of being Black, but it would be an authentic thing, and that is important. Then what are the characteristics? We've got pattern, we've got color, we've got diversity, we've got symbolism. Those all go into experience, how to relate your experience and how to tell the story. Y'all are hitting the nail on the head pretty much.